There we go. Hi, Rachel. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear
Okay.
you, Rachel.
Okay, great.
Awesome. Well, I hooked it up to this, and what I did was I angled the laptop a little bit.
Okay. Did you wanna, this one has a way nicer mic on it.
Which one does?
This mic is way better.
Do you want to put that in?
Yep. So I can get that set up for you guys.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you got it, right?
I think that's right. Okay, so that's not happening.
He was here for a union meeting.
Yeah.
You want me to admit Mr. Zlack? Okay. And I'm gonna mute you, Frank. Okay.
I don't think. Wasn't moving. Because I was
Yeah.
moving my laptop. I'm like, the camera is moving. So yeah, that's good. Thanks, Nick.
Yes, and that microphone picks up really well. You might have to speak up over there a little.
I don't plan on talking to you, right?
Okay.
Well, Rachel is on. Yep. Yeah. You like to call me, Jordan, we do it a forum, four president, one virtual. Virtual. We're going to go to the budget questions. Alrighty. Good evening, board. I've just handed out a packet, which has some calculations on it. So I just want to go over these with you and share some scenarios with you in terms of what are we looking at and what its possible impacts could be in the future and right now. And then hopefully when the board's questions are answered. The first scenario is if we were to go to our max allowable tax cap. So it's the one which has the 4.48%. So it's just the scenario in which we are showing if we were to go to 4.48%, the next year it would be 2.61, and then it kind of levels off right around 2%. But I'd like to draw your attention to the green highlighted numbers. That's the number that we would be collecting in addition to this year from the tax levy. So in other words, if you went to 4.48%, we'd collect an extra 336,000. But then next year, even though we were dropped into the 2% range, we'd still be collecting that amount of money in terms of tax levy. It provides us that stabilization. If you look below that for the 1.99%, our tax levy may seem like it is the same as the one above, which is right around 2% in the 2% range. But again, if you look at the green highlighted numbers, the levy that we're actually collecting in dollars is more than $300,000 less than what we would collect in the first scenario. So what that does is, over a couple of years, now it adds up. So like there's in the next 4 or 5 years, we're looking at about 4 or 5 times 300,000, which is about $1.5 million gap. So we have to think about when we do the tax levy, what is the benchmark it is setting in that highlighted green section for future years as well, because that also determines the programs that we have, the programs that we can expand, what are the things we can do in the district and not really be able to do in the district. Because our aim is to be the best district in the state of New York and in the US. So what are we looking at financially? The next page are 2 more scenarios. They're going to be pretty close to the 1.99. So you can see the numbers don't change too much in the highlighted green section. They stay right around the 100,000. But I wanted to bring to the board at least 4 scenarios of 2.1, 2%, 1.99, and the 4.48, which is the maximum allowable. To address the board's concerns from Tuesday, is there a way that we can get the tax levy down close to 2% or at 2%? The answer is yes, but there are some consequences to going to that tax levy. Part of it is the amount of the highlighted green section that we will be able to collect. That is something you got to keep in mind. The other is how much money we'll have in reserves going forward, and what are going to be the consequences of that as well, in addition to the unappropriated fund balance. So again, these are scenarios. I wanted to make sure that the board had 4 different scenarios to look at. Ask any questions that you would like in terms of its impact. Can we function under any of these 4 scenarios? Yes, we can for this year. But it's also for the future years that we need to take a careful look in terms of what may or may not happen. The 3rd page onwards, you will see basically is one of the requests the board had made was in terms of what is the surplus left in the prior years. And so therefore, if you look at page number 3, we're giving an estimate of we're mentioning what it was in previous years, as well as what an estimate could be for this year. So when you look at the total reserves, the appropriated and unappropriated fund balance, for this year's closing, we're looking at about 700,000 for appropriated fund balance, and unappropriated would be around 870,000. So those are the numbers we're looking at for this year's closeout. And
100,000 plus that 870 is what's going to be left over from this year's budget.
that and a little more. So I'm going to have Karen explain that, because there are some reserves that we've also opened, reserve for TRS and repair reserve in the 3rd scenario, because those are reserves that we do want to put some amount in. So Karen, go ahead.
So if you look at the middle one where it says 1720, those reserves, that's the starting of our 2021 school year. That's the start. So that's what was in reserves. And then the appropriated fund balance in that budget was 500,000. That unappropriated fund balance, that 3.8 million, that amount is at the 6/30/21. So right now it's not in there. Okay, I'm sorry. So down here, this is just the budget. No, none of the unappropriated fund balance. This is just the budget. Okay. So technically you can take these numbers down here, the reserve amount, because everything goes into one pot, right? That would be this 3.8 million above. And then also the reserve amount.
So this is not predicted at the end of this year then?
This, yes, but
Or
budget
prediction.
only, budget only. So that unappropriated fund balance is what the cushion left over in our current budget.
Surplus from this.
This
Yeah.
is this year's number.
Yeah.
Yes.
These
The
are
last two
predictions
lines.
for this year.
The last 2 lines, the appropriated fund balance, that's what we're budgeting for next year. We have to take it out of this year's budget. So that's left over in this year's budget. The reserve
70 is left over, plus the 700.
plus the 700, plus the 1.6 in reserves. Technically, that 1.6 in reserves, other than the 1 million that I'm proposing we move to the capital reserve, is already there. It's already there, because none of that money from reserves has been used or has changed. You see all those reserves are the same number year after year.
If I understand this correctly, this is about, we're gonna, in our bank account, we'll have about $3 million left.
Yes, this is why I'm putting here, I listened to what you said, and Joe and I spoke about it, and you're exactly right. Because of the past 2 years, so back here, if you remember, we had moved the 1.4 million to appropriated to do those capital project things,
Right.
and then we didn't do them because we did a capital project, and then in March we left. So this is why this number ended up being so large, that unappropriated.
Which
You know.
feels like a big,
Yes,
wow.
it's a slap on the wrist if you're over the 4%. But you're exactly right. We have
Yeah.
plenty to move into reserves to increase our unappropriated fund balance, especially considering, what the year is. And that's exactly what we spoke about, is that you're exactly right. It was just a matter of philosophy. My thought is we put it in reserves, and your thought is we reduce the tax levy, then we put it in reserve. So that's exactly what Joe and I banged heads about here and came up with this. But yes, it is. This $870,000 is the amount that is left over, not to be used in the next year's budget, in the current year's budget. But additionally, there's 3 million sitting in unappropriated right now.
So
So if we took the 3 million and moved that all into reserves, let's say, then we would only have $870,000 at the end of this year. That's not counted towards next year's budget. But as it is right now, and these numbers can change because this is an estimate, you know.
But when we get through with next year's budget, we're gonna generate another portion on unappropriated fund balance.
Yes.
I think the board has to stop and ask if we're gonna do another capital project anytime soon.
Yes.
Because if we're not going to do another capital project, do we really want to put $1 million?
You got it right now, $1 million in there.
No,
No.
that's
No,
what she
That's
was,
what I'm proposing.
that's
Okay,
what she's proposing.
okay, so the $3 million is gone. What's the capital project balance now?
0.
You know,
Zero.
it's strange.
Okay, so it's zero. So it's zero current. Okay, a lot of the capital projects are based on a cost allowance.
Right, and we don't have much left, so I think that,
So we have 5 year, or so it's 5 years since the last true project to generate cost allowances.
I don't.
No, to start generating cost allowances so that you get aid on it without,
So I believe this building here, we are completely out of aid for outside work and soft costs. Am I correct with that, Karen?
I can't say that for certain. I do believe outside site work because the track was actually over. We had already, but every year things fall off, so I can't,
But that's not
Tell
gonna
you.
fall off for a while.
no, but I don't know what's falling off
so
of your
let's just
building.
take what the minimum is 5 years. So say 5 years, you're not gonna do anything.
I don't think we're gonna, I mean, is it feasible for us to do another capital project in the next 5 years?
I think not in the next, but at 5 years.
It
Probably look for a
depends
small one.
on the building condition survey. So well,
Right.
we'll keep that in mind. But it depends. It's not gonna be to the magnitude we have to do. Probably not. So you're talking maybe capital project of the $2 to $3 million range.
The million is the max that you can put in there. So that's all.
Well, I mean,
Anytime that we've been moving, it has been $1 million.
Do a project in 5 years, if we put 500,000 a year, and that leaves you 2.5 million, and by the time you do your aid, that's a $10 million project. You do the aid, you get 75% aid, so in 5 years,
Yeah, I don't see us doing the magnitude of what we've done projects here. Because on the significant work, we're gonna.
Right.
And there again, nothing's from schoolhouse yet on the numbers there of how much is gonna be completed in this.
Not yet, because they are still working with the contractors to make sure that it's actually reflect the scope.
So,
Nothing needs to be made as far as a decision on that. That was just me showing you that if we did, this is what we would end up with. A lot of decisions will be made before, because if we're gonna move money into reserves, that has to just happen
but
in
this
June.
one, this scenario at the bottom here shows 1 million into reserves plus the
No.
set.
We haven't moved it
almost
yet.
1.7 million into reserves, right?
Okay, but then you still have the 2 lines below,
You still have the 700,000,
the 870.
870.
So
Right,
what I was
that-
getting to is in capital projects, when we look at finalizing the stuff, we need to look also on our building condition survey, because we do have a bad boiler, that we take care of that stuff so we don't get tagged.
Right.
If we're gonna do a project out 5 years, it's gonna have to be a compromise on what we're gonna do with this project.
And friend, that's exactly why I put in that, like I said, TRS and repair reserve for decisions to be made when we can better narrow down how much money we are talking about at the end of the year.
But
Now-
Frank, it may not be best practice to do the boiler in this project.
I don't know, because you got that one up there. The other one goes down, you got one.
No, I don't dispute that,
So I don't know what the numbers.
but I'm just saying it may be best to, instead of paying your architects and paying your construction, all those,
It all depends if you're gonna do the field.
that's right.
So the question I have is the repair reserve, which you got nothing in there yet.
No, that's what, because I was just letting you know that in the current, capital reserve is typical that we have moved, repair reserve and TRS reserve. We haven't even
A
created
repair
those.
reserve.
Mhm.
What does it take to take the money out of a repair reserve?
I don't have that answer. Let me look.
Does it take voter approval or board approval?
I think it's board approval because
No, the
it's
capital
for,
reserve for capital is voter approval.
Frank, The problem with it, there'd be a strong issue if it's a voter approval for repair reserve. Because if you usually have an issue with a repair, it needs to be fixed
I know the
immediately, and you don't have
right
time
away.
to.
Well, I
hold
know
the
the law, because
referendum.
if you
Right
put,
away.
say you put 500 capital project, you can't take it out unless you have voter approval.
Right, but that's what I'm saying.
So if you
Maybe,
put 500 in your repair reserve and you don't use it, you want to go to capital project, you can transfer to a capital project and not worry about having repairs, then you need voter approval to take it out. You can move
Right.
from one reserve to another. You can't move out of the capital reserve.
the capital reserve requires both.
Right, but I don't know about the repair reserve. I don't believe it requires vote, but I want to make sure. Because you take money out of repair reserve and dump it into your capital reserve and move capital project.
Says-
Karen, is it allocated? Like
It
if
says
it's-
there are no referendum requirements for the establishment of a repair reserve fund or for expenditures from the fund.
So that's a state reserve that
It says a resolution appropriating money.
That's right.
But is it allocated money? In other words, if it's in repair reserve, we can only use it for repairs. Or can
There's
can use
rules
it for
on
something
how
else?
you can use it.
Uh-huh.
Here's the purpose: to pay for certain repairs to critical or to capital improvements or equipment. The types of repairs must not recur annually or at shorter intervals. So you can't do like your regular maintenance on your elevator.
no.
But if the elevator
You can put a
breaks,
boiler in,
repair.
Frank. You can put a boiler in.
Right,
Yeah.
but can we pull out of that reserve, put it in another reserve? That's what I want to be sure of. You have a lot of cash here,
Mhm,
and I have a hard time going out with high tax rates if you have a lot of
mhm.
cash. Just not gonna work. So we need to be cognizant of where we
It
want to
says-
put it.
Frank, it says all or any part of a repair reserve fund may generally be transferred to a capital reserve fund or in
There you
school
go.
districts to a reserve fund established pursuant to section 3651 of the education law, or to a contingency and tax stabilization reserve fund. So pretty much you can move it wherever you want.
So,
I would say put money into that capital or repair reserve instead of capital.
I agree.
But the point is, we have enough money to put it in all of them. And if
But
you want to
Karen,
bring
it
the tax
depends on
cap
what your
down. with that.
philosophy is.
Hmm?
Depends on your philosophy. I mean, I'm looking at this and I'm seeing community members that
Right.
are struggling.
What I'm saying
I
is,
see a mess in Steventown right now with the tax assessments.
Oh, yeah. Huge,
I heard about that.
huge,
Huge.
huge.
I got
I
a
believe,
question.
so I believe what Karen is saying is from the money that we have, right? So like, let's say we go out with this tax levy, whatever the board agrees on, from the money that we have to distribute it to the different reserves. I think that's what she's trying to say. Like, we're not trying to collect extra cash, but what we already have, based on the tax levy that the board agrees to, we should distribute it among the different reserves so that we have it for that.
But
That's what I.
where I'm coming to too, each year we generate a certain amount of money of unappropriated fund balance when we clean house. Now this year we got two lines.
Yeah.
So, but we got 1.5 mil. So we really don't need to bring in a lot of extra taxes to do something we need in the future. We have cushion money to correctly fix it if we see state and everything's declining in multiple years without a huge spike or trying to stabilize it.
Yeah, this year was also a little bit of an anomaly because we didn't spend a lot by being remote in certain ways and all of that. So next year would be a little bit
But
different.
if I look to 19, generated way more, double. And
Yeah,
I look at,
but Frank, that's a little bit of a unique year as well.
I know, but then if
You
you
gotta
look at
look at
next
the years
year,
prior.
at 20, I look at still a lot to generate. Each year you generate a certain amount.
but these are not typical years. This one and this one are not typical years. And this
This
one's
one's
not.
not the,
None of them are, because the first one was when we had to spend down the EBLA, that employee benefits reserve. So that was a weird one. And then this one's, the 20 is a weird one because we left school in March. And then now currently, again, a weird one because we didn't do trips or any of
But my
the
point
stuff.
is you're going to generate something next year. It may not be to that magnitude, but it's going to be not far from what we got down below here. So kind of agree. We could put some in the capital reserve, a minimal amount or whatever. What it does, it locks it into designated things. Before it changes, you don't lose everything. You don't have to put $1 million in there. Repair reserve, if you're through and you can transfer it out. God,
So you don't have to make any decisions on this. This is just an estimate as far as, looking at the surplus. And if you want, every Friday, I can give Joe an update of how, to start narrowing down that number so
right,
you
well,
can
it gives
make
us
some
a
more
great
informed
handle
decisions.
on what we're going to do with the first page.
Well, I have questions about the first page, but I
Okay.
just gotta do some math right now.
How much would a boiler cost if we had to replace the boiler? And it wasn't a capital project. So you probably want at least a couple $100,000 in the repair reserve.
Well, you've got more than put in that reserve.
Well, I think I'm just saying as a minimum.
We have about 3.2 at the end of the year.
So one other thing about using a repair reserve, if you know that we need to replace the boiler, we need to just budget that. Because the repair reserve, you have to pay back half of it as soon as you have a resolution to use it. And by the end of that fiscal year, you have to have repaid 100% of it. So you have to
You're
repay
better off
yourself.
just paying for it. If we
Oh,
know
okay.
we have
To
a
budget.
boiler, we
So it's
just
not
pay
as
for it.
simple as just.
Yeah, if we know what it is, we don't know what it is, that's where you set the money to the side in the repair reserve.
Repair
but I'm just-
reserves are you have a working boiler?
No,
and
what I
that's
wasn't
it.
saying though, what I was saying is, we don't plan on replacing the boiler. Next year, we find out we have to. So we shouldn't have enough money for
Right.
at least that large of a project.
And what do you mean by repay?
Does it repay 50%?
Where?
Yeah.
Back to the reserve.
That's the reserve. You
That's
have
the
you have to
rule of that
repay yourself.
reserve.
And if we transfer money out,
Out of that reserve altogether into another, then that doesn't apply. It's when you use it.
Yep.
so you can buy the boiler, your budget, transfer the money out of the reserve into your budget.
No. That's for the reserve account, Frank. Sneaky businessman.
Since we have to pay ourselves back once we establish
Membership,
it.
right?
I think we have to look at the project, what we're spending there. We have time.
Right.
But this is good information to
But-
really think about what we're going to do with reserves.
But I really do think that, Frank, if we need a boiler down there and it's that,
Well, one of them's gone. That's why we're looking at capital project, get 8 on it, so.
yeah, but you also pay more though. So that contractors know that, so you pay a higher amount than if you
If
just
you have to
bid.
do construction work inside the building, you're gonna have an architect do it, period. Boiler isn't a direct replacement. You have to do construction work. I don't know, like when we did the boilers here, we had to remove those old pads that were on top of the vinyl asbestos flooring when they decided not to take it out when they put the pads in.
I guess we'd have to look and see what we.
You have to see what's entailed to replace the boiler. Could be straight. Could be crooked.
So Joe, I have some questions on this calculation of the tax levy limit. My first question is, this is making some assumptions, particularly with inflation factor. It's saying that it's gonna be 2%, which it's been historically less than that 2%. The other concern I have is the end product in the equation is always higher. You can start with the same percentage, but if the other number is higher, of course, it's going to look like it's levied even. So when you look at this, a 2%, in year 3,
Which one? First page?
yeah, the first page is what I'm on. So if you look at the 2% or in year 3, so they're pretty close, 2.00
Yeah.
and 2.8. Of course, that number is going to be higher because you've already collected more money those years.
Works on a bigger base.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, so
That is correct.
that's some assumptions.
Yeah.
Um,
So when you collect that 4.48, it bumps you up to like
It-
336
right.
more than the current. And that's why once it's pumped up, because we are going positive every time, it kind of stays at that high level.
Right.
Whereas if you go with 1.99, it does bump it up, but now it's just, but you're absolutely right, that's the impact of that. Because
Right.
you collect more, therefore in future years, a little less.
And back to actually why do we want to create a reserve for the TRS?
We can just, the TRS is a volatile expense, and we don't actually get it until the end of the budget year, or the end of the year to know exactly how much it is. So it was a new reserve that we were allowed to make a few years ago. We chose not to make one,
Right.
but it's just another one, and it has a little more leeway in it than, say, your capital reserve.
Teachers retirement system.
And it's one where you can carry a hefty amount, whereas with others, you just can't. You have to be one that you don't you can carry a hefty amount, only because our TRS bill typically is around $800,000 at
And if
least.
the stock market does very bad, then we have to pay for it later.
That is correct. That is correct. It will tie into that. And then the state asked us to bridge the gap. Because they lost money in the stock market. Well,
And we have to
dollars,
do
so
the entire gap for
so
your
we have to
account
fill
with
it
a
out.
restriction.
because it's a commitment to those who are retired, so come to us.
Yeah, but how
That's why
often
it's
does that happen?
It happened once that I remember.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
previous one lost in all the stock market, we really paid a lot.
Like 10 or 15.
Oh, no,
It was large.
it was deferred, and the other Como deferred it,
Oh, okay.
and then it got reinstated, and then we paid a penalty. It cost us only $500,000
So that
extra.
was about 2 years or 20 years ago, wasn't it?
But before this, that's for the other one, Paul, I think, lost it on the stock market too. And that's when our rates each year were going double digit.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering how stable that TRS is currently.
It's as stable as the stock market.
Well,
That's-
Actually,
That's it.
actually TRS, I think is more stable than the stock market because they invest in a lot of real estate as well.
Okay.
They were one of the few retirement systems that continued to be positive when all the others were negative.
I think McCall did diversify, and the new system diversifies.
So to answer your question, it's hard to predict it. With the reserve, we'll have some cushion, so that let's say we have a lot of COVID expenses next year, getting hit on state aid and ERS, the stock market takes a hit, we have some cushion built in there. Because legally, we're obligated to pay that no matter what. So it'll give us that cushion there. That's the purpose. But you're right that, it's hard to predict. We can't say that the stock market is going to be great or awful. That's part of the point. The last couple of pages are just the property tax report card. So depending on what tax levy the board agrees on, it's just property tax report card.
so to reduce these numbers, what was eliminated from the budget?
We didn't
So-
want it.
Yeah, we use more of the
Appropriated fund balance.
appropriate
what you
fund
said,
balance, but then we also use more of the money coming in from the federal and the RRSA.
No, we had already done that before.
Okay, so,
We appropriated more fund balance.
okay.
Okay. So then the line by line item.
Yeah. Yes, that is stable because that goes by the expense for each credit. Yes. Yeah, we did not cut any program, we did not cut any.
Can I ask some very specific questions about that? Business development has a $25,000 increase in contractual expense. What is that? It's substantial, it's 171%.
That's a copier replacement for the district. $25,000 increase or $27,000. No, copiers district-wide, 3 of them. See what it can do.
And then there was a thing, what is- I do remember you saying that. Operation, the non-instructional salaries is 16% increase.
For 1620.
Yep, 1620, doc 150, dash 50. 1620.
We're doing an estimate on contractual increases. That's the contract that's out now. So we put it in a little high, so we have room for 3%.
16%.
No, I'm saying overall, all of CSEA, but those staff in particular, like, I don't see any weird anomalies as to why.
16%.
2610.
1620 dot
60-50.
not instruction. Yeah.
The contract?
No, it's not instructional. Not contractual. Contractual.
I'm just looking for any errors. There's steps also in there. So people who are going longevity steps, so it's not just a percentage increase, but
Percent is a lot.
This has nothing to do with the track.
For maintenance?
No, this has nothing to do with that.
Okay, so it's not.
$467, $481.
No, from 415 to 481. $66,000 increase.
I don't know if that, but 467 is the current, not 415, so I'm not sure. Let's see if maybe that is pulling from the.
They also have the same question with the maintenance, the non-instructional salary are up 8.4%. That's what the 3 employees, correct?
So, I'm sorry, from where? No, Cyril is also under 1620. Salaries.
There's 4. Well, actually, there's 3 FTEs.
Yeah. But yeah, that 415 number is just it's a manual number. It's not pulling from the correct spot. It's literally typed in as 415. That number should be 467,000. So that increase is not as great as it. No, the current number is correct. It's the previous year showed the increase is what's showing is incorrect, but the budget number for 481 is correct.
481 is correct there. 41.
And that maintenance number is correct, that's an 8.4% increase.
Yes.
You have 2 that are going, 1 that's going.
So the 2 part-timers, I've also budgeted them at a little bit greater than half because they work extra hours. So I budgeted them instead of at 4 hours at 6 hours. Otherwise, we don't have the money to pay them when they work extra. Quite a bit. Or Katie noted that one also, it's 227. I don't know why those numbers are put in as a static number versus pulling from the, but that is also,
27 was last year's.
yeah, 227, 600, with the 3% overall.
Couldn't hear you.
Go ahead, because everybody probably has the same question.
All the big changes Places
Well-
where it is $0, 0% change.
Well, when we found that one,
Yeah.
the future one, I checked everything current, so current year budget number is correct, but
Previous years is not, so therefore the,
obviously on
Yeah.
a couple spots, I don't
yeah,
know why it's.
so for the big one. So it doesn't change this year's budget line item. But last year's it is pulling the wrong number, so
Yeah.
therefore it's showing the wrong percent change. So as a solution, we can, again, it's not gonna change this year's budget.
No, I
We can at
understand that.
least see, we can at least go back to the big percent changes, Katie, that you pointed out, two of them. And maintenance.
The maintenance and the operations, and then
was one of the
the copier. It was $25,000 for the copier.
disability, salaries, TAs are 21%.
Those are all screwed up because the TAs, because they're budgeted under BES, middle school, high school, and special ed. However, if I budget Jeff under a special ed TA this year, next year he may be at BES, and I don't know until after budget is over.
Those
So-
are hard.
Yeah, so where it gets expensive, so I moved them around for what's current. But that's, yeah,
Right, but you could also have a TA that is your higher MTA that goes to special ed and high school.
exactly.
And those numbers.
And anything with special ed, you have a family with two high-need students, you're talking about a couple $100,000 possibly. So it's guesswork on that. You gotta go high.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We have to provide that cushion. Yeah.
I would want to propose these numbers a lot higher.
As far as for this, because remember the OPEB that we were paying back, or that they were giving back to us? We don't have that anymore as of this year. And expenses increased to include the cost of pre-K and a couple other high dollar items.
That's a package for the board doc.
Another spot, just so you know, the 2040 150 Sam Brewer, she got an increase that was within the budget year, so that's original number 75 was correct to last year's budget, but it's not what she's currently being paid, so that increase is not quite as hefty as it
Right.
seems.
So George, are we trying to decide which one of these last three scenarios is the scenario we go with?
Yeah, the four scenarios that are there, I think that's what, so the board, from all the way from 1.99 to 2.10. And the property tax report card is there because that's what the board works on. So that's why those last couple of pages are basically that.
I know, I always feel like I'm getting a better deal when I have something at 99 cents versus a straight cut.
Well, yeah. I had a conversation with somebody yesterday about sales.
Yeah.
Mike's laughing.
It's always easier when something's, you know,
Yeah.
20 or 19.99, you can say, oh, it's
That's
19
right.
bucks versus $20.
Yeah.
Or when you go to fill in gas and it's like, $2.96 and you're like, oh, look at that, that's, your eyes catch on to two and.
That's just my opinion.
No, I get it. I get it. That's exactly right, yeah. So yeah, it's sales thing.
Yeah,
That's
sales
what I was told. Sales tactic. Yeah. But in any of these scenarios, we will be able to maintain our programs. That's the important thing. And plus, we'll be able to have a social worker, 1.0 reading specialist for the elementary school. And I'm trying a different approach in terms of substitutes, because it's hard for us to get daily subs in the district because of geographical location. So I've spoken with Karen and the administrators of getting one building sub for each of our buildings, because we're going to pay a substitute price and a substitute rate anyway. But we're working on the logistics of that. So I just wanted the board to know that that is something I do intend to start next year.
You always have a sub in the building, so it's not like they're sitting around
Exactly.
fiddling their thumbs.
Exactly. We'll always need a sub. So I'm just working out the logistics in terms of what would the salary benefits, etc. look like for them. But that is also going to be incorporated right into this. What's that? Yes, yes, especially because emergencies come up, and then you look at, when we have the CSE meetings, and you need coverage, those are the days when it's harder, so it'll provide a lot of flexibility, and when we look at the amount of expense that we have for our subs anyways, then we get a daily sub, a building sub, that makes a big difference. And they have the guarantee of employment every day,
If the ch-
which is huge.
The other good thing is that alleviates Tracy having to make the sub, because
Absolutely.
she's done it a couple of times. myself.
At our Questar meeting tonight, Harry is our business manager. One of the things he commented, mostly flatline zero, a lot of the rates, the component districts. And he's thinking that in the future, they won't have to make it up. He knows that he's running it tight by not increasing. He felt that the component districts have enough burden this year with their stuff that they're going to make it work. So they flatlined it, and they realized that in the future, you may have to make adjustments to do it. Approach. Looking at, we got cash in hand, it's really not right to collect extra money when everyone's struggling. Like that. I think we should have control growth each year, not when we've done that in the past, it's kind of worked. Haven't run short. I think the neighboring school district down there, Lebanon, ranked too many years at 0. This year they're pushing 7. They also forgot to collect money last year that they should have. They screwed up. They've had a roller coaster. I think we can survive this. We have some flexibility. We have reserves at the end of the year. And a lot of our construction project will be defined too, what we're going to actually do. And what I think we need to look this year, how we're bidding things out to see if there's bidding opportunities to save money. Buyer's market, you have to look at bidding in my business. We're scrutinizing our purchasing practices, period. Down to everything. And the suppliers do whine, but they still want to sell. Manageable. A little bit more work for Karen, though. Where do we want to go?
I voice my opinion. I said it's a little easier to swallow 1.99 than it is to swallow a
Yes,
grocery
I
store.
totally agree with that. And it looks like that's doable.
It's not gonna impact programs.
No, that's what I mean by doable. And I don't think we're gonna ever run into a situation where something comes up.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's $11,000.
Yeah, we just got one.
It's not, I mean, it's a substantial amount of money, but it's not like,
Yeah, but
if
not
you're looking
in
at the
a
grand scheme.
$20 million budget or for whatever we are right now.
With 1.99 also in the coming years, you can see it kind of, it's pretty consistent, so we won't have the 0% 1 year, 7% the next year, those
And
kind of
that's
swings.
making the assumption the inflation factor stays flat.
So
Yes,
it's making
that is
the
correct.
assumption that the inflation factor is.
No, it doesn't. It's 1.0123,
No, that's this year.
and it's 1.02 after that.
Yeah, that's making the assumption that it's flat.
Yeah.
But but it can go down. It can go over that, it can go under that.
Inflation factor.
Not for calculating this.
Huh?
Not for this calculation.
No, not for the calculation, you have to base it on, what we're doing. But 5 years down the road, who knows?
But hopefully it won't be too different, so that we can stay close to.
Derek, where do you want to go? Questions?
I think the-
Go ahead, I'm still,
No, I'd like to hear, what Rachel and Tony have to say as well. I think you pretty much know my opinion, and you pretty much stated it, but, you know, I just.
Rachel, do you want to weigh in on your opinion?
I'm good. I think we're lucky that our kids are not going to do without. I think that's what we're focusing on. So everything, hopefully will fall into place after that, but we're not cutting any programs. We're not cutting any jobs. I'm grateful for that. So.
Kelly?
I agree with Katie in terms of the perception of the 1.99. I think, when people look at it, it seems like that is an appropriate amount. It seems like it provides stabilization where we won't get those fluctuations.
Okay. Sherry or Derek?
I guess I'm in agreement with 1.99.
Sherry? Okay. So to fill in the magic blanks, which numbers would you like put in here? Resolution.
The total budget for Frank is 23 million.
Yeah.
Right there. The 23.
Fine. So the first one, your amount is 23,846.90.
What is the 1.99 equal to in funds? I'm just trying, this is my first time doing it, so I'm just trying to wrap my head around what we're doing. If that's the 93,000, that's what that is.
How much is the total levy increase? 194,229.
Second line too, 23,840. And that's for the total. That's the total levy.
No, that was just the increase, the 194.
Yeah.
The total levy, if you,
No, not the total levy. It includes the total.
What is
Yes,
it
So the
equal to in
1.99
dollars?
increase, what does that equal to in dollars? That's my.
$194,229. If you look at this,
So if we're, I guess I have a question. Why, if we have this much cash in reserve left over, why are we increasing it all? I'm just trying to wrap my head around that.
So in theory, Derek, if you you're gonna say 0%, eventually you're gonna hit people with 8, 10, or 10%.
Yeah, but if we have this much cash left over at the end of each year as it is, I mean, what was last year's
We
tax
put,
levy?
what we put this year, we put
$500,000 in the current year.
So we put 500,000 on unappropriated fund balance into reduced taxes into this budget. So we use $500,000 to reduce it. And it gives you a little cushion. If something goes down next year significantly, we can bridge the gap for 1 or 2 years without going double digit. That's why years past, we didn't do this kind of management, and you'd have spikes 8%, 12%, and it just
That was
created
in
chaos.
when we were in here in the district there, that's what was happening. It was hitting like 15%, 18%. And then they
Double
would
digits.
levy. And then they'd go back up to 12%, and then it would.
What Lebanon
What was
see
last year's tax levy?
1.99.
1.99.
I know, it doesn't seem intuitive, but, well, I'll go back a while. Stratton gave us $500,000, and I voted not to take it, because the next year we had to make up that plus whatever increase, so we had a big increase the next year, because we kept it low this year. So you don't want to get in a vote like that.
That makes sense. I'm just trying to wrap my head around that for a second.
Those are good
It doesn't
questions.
make sense.
There's a cushions. If the TRS goes up, and it's done that in the past, I have 1 year of spike or 2 years, and try to flatten it.
The other thing is, if you get a spike like that, you don't want to be in the spring season and say, we can't offer sports. Can't offer extracurriculars because
Or mid-year cuts. And so we don't want to be in that situation. This provides that stability factor. Right, through the year. And then at the end of next year, we'll again, look at it and see what we have and what's a reasonable tax levy going forward. Because our goal is to make sure that none of the programs that we have for our kids go away, but instead grow. And so this will provide us stability.
I also think that kind of reserve, to be able to have that down the road, we don't know the impact of the pandemic in terms of our kids and academics and the programs, and where we may need additional support after we have a better understanding and handle on that.
And that's a great point, Kelly, because
I mean, we may need additional reading specialists, or, perhaps, additional programming or after school for our middle. I mean, we just don't know the long-term impact. I don't think anybody does. And if we want to bring up the marginalized students that have had difficulty through this pandemic, it may require supports above and beyond what we're currently budgeting for.
You're absolutely right, Kelly, because, Karen and I were having a conversation about the social worker, half social worker versus full, because depending on the needs of our students, we may have to go to a full-time social worker. We may need to do some other hiring to bridge the gap, because at the end of the road, we want to make sure that our kids make up all the learning loss as well as move forward. So it helps us to have that, because we have neighboring districts where they had good reserves. And what they did was they kept 0%, 0%, and they kept eating up through it. And then when they had an emergency, that's when you see the spike in 7%, 10%, 12%.
Correct.
We don't want to do that to our students or to our community. So we'll be fiscally responsible. We're not going to spend a dollar if we don't have to. I'm a very conservative person fiscally. So every dollar is going to be accounted for. We're going to make sure we really need to spend the dollar. But I'd rather have the dollar in our reserve than in the middle of the year try and scramble to see where we can bridge the gap.
We're all set. We have 2 resolutions. First one is that the operating budget in the amount of $22,840,690 for the Board of Education be adopted for fiscal year 2022, and the tax levy of taxes be assessed therefore in accordance with the law.
I'll make the motion. Frank.
Jeff, how do you vote?
Yes.
Yes.
Amy, how do you vote? Terry?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Rachel, how do you vote?
Yeah,
Kelly, how do you vote?
Yes.
Next motion, of the Board of Education, of Monroe Central School District hereby adopt and approve the property tax report card for the Monroe Central School District as amended 2021 to 2022 budget, and authorize the superintendent or designate as required for state education department.
Okay.
Katie, how do you vote?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
Harry?
Yes.
Eric? Yes. Rachel?
Yes.
Kelly?
Yes.
Motion for adjournment.
I second. I feel much better about that.
No. There's a new movie out tonight called Them. It's based on the premise of the movie. And it's like cloning people.
Then was
Yeah, it is.
radiation from almost.
It was a black and white. Oh, yeah. I think I do recall that. I think I do. It's really bad.
Los Angeles. And of course, the one I like is James Arnett, and they had a woman scientist came out. That train is like, so she's getting on the plane, her nylon stitching. The two guys are staring, you know, but now if you watch it on television now, I guess that's
Of course they do.
because it had to be unbelievably correct. It was one of the best nuclear exposure.
Yeah. Better than the giant carrots on Gilby Valley.
I didn't see that. Yeah, the invasion of the crab monster.
Oh, nice.
The professor.
Oh, really? Go see it in the morning.
He was also.
Oh, I didn't know he was in all that. I didn't know if he really was out of it.
My chipmunks down the shower, no
Were
different.
they on it for a while or what?
David?
Well, they updated ours last year, and there was a letter on the assessor's desk where he showed it to me. Governor Cuomo said everybody in this area has to increase their taxes. Now, overall, they don't care about you or me, but the overall for the town had to go 9% because we were
Way
on
out
tax.
the door.
I didn't think we were undertaxed.
No.
Yeah, mine went up
I'm not sure.
$15,000, that was it. But we went to 100%. Trying to explain the housing, equivalent housing, the formula used for that is so subjective. I'm surprised you can get anything out of that.
That's a lot of money. Exactly. It's a farm.
My brother was bitching because he paid $1,000 last year on a $280,000 house. My mother's house was assessed at 800. That was, he was upset because
They
they
get a new
afforded
rate.
400.
Dollars per thousand put it down, they didn't say anything. They just sent us out.
This is your assessment.
No.
Yeah.
Towns, they're immigrants.
Most out there, they can't do property taxes.
Last minute.
They did this 8 or 9 years ago. It was such a chaos, they scrapped it. He went out to town, spent $100,000.
And it's so much work. And you can't get your kids to a job.
Well, I'm not in the town politics, you can't deal with these people.
It's ridiculous.
The governor of Colorado,
And
he's trying to ban
they
cows.
can't vote on town budget.
They don't like
vote on our
that. He
budget.
said we should be
We make
growing
our
the
frustrations
stuff
on
to
us.
make artificial
That's the
beef,
problem, because
which requires massive amounts of water.
I was gonna say.
Colorado has water shortage.
That's law.
And cattle, you stick them up in a high range, you got 10,000 acres with two
Right, right.
cattle on
And
it.
I'll keep you posted on,
You can't farm that
You know,
land.
I'm pushing them to use more and more online.
We'll have a discussion with them Tuesday, they'll be in a better place, they'll understand where we're coming from.
It's everywhere.
It is crazy.
I showed my wife that
Doesn't make sense half the stuff they think.
Albany was having,
I asked, if you're gonna put something in there,
demonstrations, they
have a
got out
part
of
number,
control.
inventory, and a use.
which Albany?
So I asked them if you have.
South Station, which is down on South Burke. Yeah.
So we're gonna look at, so he's gonna.
Yeah.
he's gonna be switching some programs. You know,
Right.
Well,
Talk to the superintendent.
Chris Cuomo said, where does it say that has to be?
So that we can get
And
some.
somebody said, first in